All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Sinai and Civics. This is our epic four-part series all about the connection between Torah, Judaism, and the founding of our country, the United States of America. So I want to begin with a joke, a story about Hamilton. Not Alexander Hamilton, but the play Hamilton. As you might know, Hamilton is a very coveted ticket, especially on Broadway. And so the story goes that there was there's a couple. They saved some money, and they got tickets. They got great tickets. What's the best ticket you can get to a show? Center. What is it called? Orchestra. Center. What's orchestra on the bottom? Yeah. Okay. So they're sitting orchestra center. Huh? Row 5. Interesting. Because you get the perspective, is that it? Yeah. They're sitting row 6. Oh, it's going to work. Row 6. What happens is, so the woman, the husband and wife, the wife sees that in the seat in the row in front of her, center orchestra row 5, which apparently is the coveted space, she sees there's a woman sitting there and there's an empty seat. She can't figure this out. So she says, tell me. She says, excuse me, I hate to be nosy, but anytime someone says they're about to be, I hate to be nosy, but tell me, what's with the empty seat? So she says, it's actually a tragic story. We had planned this with me and my husband, and he passed away. He recently passed away, and he can't be here. She says, I'm so sorry to hear that. Sorry for your loss. And then she thinks about this, and then a few minutes later says, I'm sorry for being nosy again, but didn't you have any friends or family that would want to join you? It's such a great seat. Why is it empty? She says, well, everyone's at the funeral. Okay, that is the joke about Hamilton. All right. I mean, is it about civics per se? I don't know. It's about the guy who was about civics. So let's begin. This is our fourth session, and we've saved the best for last. In Lesson 1, to recap, in Lesson 1, we explored the Torah influence on the Pilgrims and the Founding Fathers, which shaped how they envisioned this country. In Lesson 2, we looked at the Torah influence on the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, specifically on the value of human equality, the value of human rights. In Lesson 3, we examined the American economy and the uniquely American value and pursuit of owning a home, owning some land, and we traced it back to the Torah's insistence that every Israelite family own a piece of the land of Israel upon entry, and that was last week's topic. Tonight, we continue our look at the Torah's influence on America as we look at the structure of the U.S. government. Our government, as we all know, is divided into 3 distinct branches. But what you might not know, and what I would bet your civics teacher omitted from the conversation, is that the very notion of dividing powers of leadership actually originates in Torah. The ancient Jewish nation that God chose and guided and molded and formed and kind of designed the way they should live, that ancient Jewish nation was taught by God himself about the imperative to create clear and distinct divisions of power. Today we'll explore this. What are these Torah origins? Why does God insist on separated powers? How does the Torah system differ from the system that we have here in the United States? And what caution must we take to ensure that the spirit of division doesn't get lost in translation? Because as we'll see, it's easy to get lost in translation. We have a lot to get to, so let's begin. So I want to begin with a basic review of the structure of our government here in the United States, specifically the branches of the U.S. government. So this is an open question. What are the 3 branches of our government here in the U.S.? Executive. All right, there we go. What I heard was legislative, executive, and judicial. And very simply, the legislative branch makes the laws, executive branch carries out the laws, and the judicial branch interprets and verifies the laws as being kosher, as being correct. So let's look at the original formulation of this system, these three branches of government, as described in the U.S. Constitution, Articles 1, 2, and 3. We're going to begin with text number 1 on page 85. Toba, if you don't mind, please read this, page 85 in your books. Again, text number 1 from the U.S. Constitution.
All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as this Congress may from time to time ordain and establish.
Thank you very much. So what's the summary? I mean, this is already kind of condensed, but we have here listed the three branches of government. Again, it's Articles 1, 2, and 3 from the U.S. Constitution, penned in 1787. Number 1, legislative powers are granted to who? To which body? Congress. Executive power is granted to whom? President. The President. And judicial power is vested in? Supreme Court. Okay. And in lower courts as need to be created. So these are the three branches of government. Now let's break down this division even further. So legislative branch we saw is Congress. What does Congress do? What are the roles of Congress? Let's go. Huh? That's right. I feel like that's a great opening for a punchline. No, but really, what is the role of Congress?
Tax and spend.
Sorry?
Tax and spend.
Tax and spend. Okay, but what does Congress do? They pass laws. What else? Create the budget. What else?
They advise and consent on appointments.
Good. They advise and consent on appointments. Excellent. What else?
They serve as a check and balance on.
We'll talk about the checks and balances in a second. Excellent. They can declare war, right? And they can approve major treaties with other nations. All right, that is all the legislative branch. The executive branch, President of the United States. What are the responsibilities of the President? Number 1,
Commander-in-Chief.
Commander-in-Chief. What else? The President can veto. Yeah, we'll talk about that in the section of checks and balances. Very good. What else?
Sign bills and acts.
Signs bills. Excellent. So the President carries out, enforces, and administers the laws, oversees the federal agencies that enforce the laws, and appoints ambassadors and judges, and acts as the nation's head of state. These are all responsibilities of the President of the United States. Legislative branch, Supreme Court and other federal courts, what is their job? Especially the Supreme Court. What is the job of the Supreme Court?
Rule and Constitution.
Good. Make sure that the laws that are being passed and approved are constitutional. Make sure they're kosher. And of course, if any question comes up in a specific case about how to apply the law, they can be the final position on whether, and how and in what way to make sure that the laws are practiced and applied in a fair and true to the intent way. All right, so these are the three branches of the U.S. government, which, yes.
Just add that the executive branch also initiates and does what do you call it? Foreign relations.
Foreign relations. Okay.
Right.
Good.
Because it's kind of important.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about why. The question that, the underlying question is why. Why all of this effort to have these divisions of power, three separate and distinct branches of government? So to understand this, I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize where the founding fathers got this idea from of separate branches, three separate branches in the first place. They didn't invent it at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. They got it rather from 18th century French philosopher Charles Louis de Montesquieu. And here's what Montesquieu writes in his book. In English, the translation is The Spirit of the Law. In French, it's L'Esprit de la Loi. And no, I don't speak French, but I play a French-speaking rabbi on Netflix. I'm kidding, I don't, but maybe it's a career change. All right, so here we go. What does he write? Text number 2, Rena. Oh, and hold on. Rumor has it that it's your birthday tomorrow. So happy birthday. Happy Erev birthday. Should be a year of amazing blessings and a lot of happiness. All right, text number 2, page 86. Please take it away.
Page 86. Preventing tyranny. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty, because apprehensions may arise lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. Again, there is no liberty if the judiciary power is not separated from the legislative and executive. Were it joined with the legislative, the life and liberty of the subject would be exposed to arbitrary control, for the judge would be then the legislator. Were it joined to the executive power, the judge might behave with violence and oppression. There would be an end to everything, were the same man or the same body, whether of the nobles or of the people, to exercise those 3 powers, that of enacting laws, executing the public resolutions, and trying the causes of individuals.
Thank you. That again is a translation from the original that was published in 1748 in French. 1748 is before 1787 when the Constitution was penned, and so this definitely and directly impacted and influenced the Founding Fathers. Now, let's break this down further. What is he saying in that first paragraph? Look what he writes. What would be the problem if there was one body that did both legislative work and executive work? What would be the problem? What's the fear?
They would control.
If you can pass the law and execute the law, guess what? That's a lot of power. Because you can make whatever law you want and then enforce it and make sure that it gets applied. That's too much power. We'll talk about how our system works by contrast. Yeah.
But also, they were looking at England and they were saying, that's what we just left. We don't
Correct.
do the same thing.
Correct. We left a system where there's one body in charge of the whole situation. Then he says in the next paragraph that if the judiciary power is not separated from the legislative and executive, it's also a problem, and for the very same reasons, basically, because if you have the courts, if the courts are aligned with the legislative branch, then they're going to approve all the laws, because there's no checks and balances to make sure a law is kosher. Of course it is. We just made it. There's not going to be any. Which body is going to say that's not okay? We're the judges. We said it's okay. We made the law and we approved it, all in the same one fell swoop. And if they're aligned with the executive branch, then again, when laws are applied and enforced, well, who are you gonna go to if you have a problem with that? Again, if the judges are aligned with that, then it's all in the same pocket. So you really need, the concept is you really need 3 separate entities. You need one entity to propose or even pass laws, another entity to, I'm going a little bit in a different order now, another entity to say, well, yes, that law is kosher or not kosher, and then the other one can enforce it. And it's only when you have these 3 distinct bodies or individuals, branches of power, as it were, that you have a functioning system that you can hope is in the best interest of the people and not devolving into tyranny of dictatorship. Yeah.
Wasn't that one of the problems that motivated the judicial reform, Bruha in Israel, that the Supreme Court, since they have no constitution, is basically making laws?
Right. That was one of the challenges in Israel. Now, Israel's always a little complicated. And I think they even didn't they at some point pen a constitution, but it's not officially ratified? There's been multiple attempts because it's like this, it's total of the constitution. It's very complicated. Israel's a very complicated place for many reasons, including the fact that, you have a governance, but it's kind of like, is it completely secular? Are there traces of, religion, Torah, halacha, that sort of thing? Not really, but you have that tension kind of like in the different systems. And it's like, well, marriage, what constitutes a legal marriage now, is aligned with also a little bit of the rabbinate, but then it's not completely a secular construct. So it's a little bit complicated. So yeah, it's, that's how Jews are. We're complicated. But the concept over here is you don't want the same person passing, approving, and enforcing the laws, because who's going to say that's not okay? Because we just said it's okay, right? The same person, it's almost like, the expression, what is it? Judge, jury, and executioner. That's kind of, just shift things around a little bit, but that's kind of what it would be if all the control was consolidated into one single body. So again, all of this comes from this system, this idea of three branches of governance comes from Montesquieu in his book from 1748. Now, in addition to the separation of powers, we also have the notion of checks and balances, which was mentioned before. The checks and balances are essentially a way in which not only does each branch of government have its own role, but each branch of government has the ability to keep another branch in check. So, for example, the legislature can write up laws, Congress can write and pass laws, and the executive branch can veto it. And then the legislative branch can override a veto if there's, a certain level of majority. And if the president gets out of hand, then Congress can impeach the president. Everyone's got something on someone else, right? Everyone's got something. And the judges, what about the judges? The court can look at laws passed by Congress and signed by the president and deem them unconstitutional and invalid. So that's the power of the courts. And at the same time, the judges of that same court, of the Supreme Court and of other federal courts, are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. So in this way, you have every body of these three, each one has something that the other one doesn't have. I liken it to when I was a kid, growing up in Squirrel Hill, Murray Avenue, and there was a store there. Oh, what was it called? It was called, Mom, what was the newsstand called? My mom is here. What was the newsstand called on Murray Avenue? Eddie's Newsstand. What was it? Eddie was the guy. Murray Avenue News. Thank you, Jerry. Jerry's also Pittsburgh. Murray Avenue News. I used to walk in there. This is late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember the year exactly. After school sometimes. All the rage was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Who remembers that? They had an arcade game. They had a video game. I used to go with quarters with some friends to pop. Yeah, that was me. Popping some quarters into that machine. I think I beat that game once. But you could choose which guy. Michelangelo, Donatello, Leonardo, Raphael. I still remember the names. Each one had something the other didn't have. This guy had speed, but not power. This guy had power, but not agility. Everyone had something the other one didn't have. You want the nunchucks, you want the sword, you want the this. You're not going to get somebody that has it all. You're not going to get someone that has nothing. Each guy has something the other guy doesn't have. Enough about me. Let's get back to the government. Each branch of government has something that the other one doesn't have. This one can write the laws, this one can veto the laws, this one can say the laws are valid or invalid, but then the person that says it's valid or invalid was appointed by this guy and approved by that. Everyone's got something the other one doesn't have. Checks and balances to hopefully make sure that no one body has, and that there's an imbalance of power yet.
What happens if we don't like what the Supreme Court decided? Can the legislature make a law, Congress make a law, and then it goes through that cycle again?
They have to amend the Constitution.
Oh,
Well,
amend the Constitution?
Unless the case in terms of statute, and then they can just amend the statute to address.
Say it again?
Unless the Congress can amend the statute to address the issues done by Congress.
Okay.
Meaning if they're basing on a statute, if the Supreme Court says based on the statute, the law needs to go this way or the other way, then conceptually they can pass a new law amending the statute that the law is based on. If you change the source, then you change the outcome. Essentially, that's what you're saying. So yeah, there are maneuverings. Each one kind of has the ability to maneuver, but hopefully within this system, there is some element of law and order and justice for all. Now, what's important is what our good friend James Madison, what Madison writes in the Federalist Papers from 1788. You do not have it in your books, but I will read a direct quote that he writes. He writes the following. Listen to this quote. It's beautiful. He adds a twist. The great security against the gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachment of the others. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Again, I'm going to read that. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Basically, what he's saying is we're counting on someone's ego and job security to fend off the encroachment of another branch that wants to usurp or somehow swallow that branch. And we're hoping to leverage the very human nature of ambition to keep everyone in their own silo. No. You're not going to touch the court. If you're the court, you're going to say, we have our power. And if you're the executive branch, same thing. If you're the judiciary, same thing. And in that way, the powers remain vested in those bodies and don't get too intermeshed. Does that make sense? I think it's a very wise approach and a very wise quote. Okay, so all of this is, again, it may seem like, when would we have learned this? What grade? I remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles better than I remember this in civics class. Mr. Jesse was my teacher, but nonetheless, what grade would this have been? Oh, so it's young. All right, so it's been a minute for most of us, but it should resonate. It should resonate with all of us. Now, the founding fathers may have been inspired to divide the branches of the U.S. government by Montesquieu, but the very first civilization to have a clear and separate division of powers is the ancient Jewish people, and the first document that outlines this is the Torah. And that is the bulk of tonight's lesson, to see that in the Torah. So to be clear, before we begin this section, I want to be very clear and say that the Torah system is not identical to the U.S. system, and we'll see some very important distinctions soon, but there are some important truths that do carry through. And so first we're going to look at the similarities and then the differences, and then see what maybe one system might be able to learn from the other. So before we read the text, and we're about to read text 3 on page 89, so everyone can get set with that. Before we read the text, I need to give you a bit of a context for the book of Deuteronomy. And this is something that when I was a child, when I was a kid in school, learning the book of Deuteronomy, I remember I somehow missed this context, and it was very confusing for me. The book of Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah, consists of the events that take place in a span of 37 days. Let me give you a little contrast here. The book of Genesis, the first book of the Torah, consists of a span of time of 2,500 years. 2,500 years is the first book. From the second book through the 4th book. So again, book 1 is 2,500 years. Books 2, 3, and 4 take place over the duration of how long? 40. Right about 40 years. I mean, you could say the slavery, but the main Exodus part, when they get out until they're up to the entering the land of Israel, which is, again, books 2 through 4, that spans 40 years. So 2,500 years, 40 years. The last book of the Torah spans 37 days. Why 37 days? Moses, is told by God that because he hit the rock to produce water, and by the way, if you can hit a rock and produce water, you might want to take that on the road and make some money. But Moses did it, and God wasn't happy, and God says to Moses, that's it. You're not going into Israel. And so Moses knew that he was going to die die, and then the people would enter into the promised land under the auspices and leadership of Joshua. Good. Now, Moses' birthday, Moshe Rabbeinu's birthday, was the 7th day of Adar. He passed away on the 7th day of Adar. He passed away on his birthday, exactly 120 years to the day. He lived to 120 on the day. starting from Rosh Chodesh Shvat, which is 1 month before Adar, every day he gathered the people. It must have been a very loud megaphone because there were a lot of people. I don't know exactly how they did it. He gathered the people every day for 37 days. From the first day of Shvat, that whole month, to the 7th day of the next month of Adar, when he passed away, he gathered the people every day and spoke to them. If you remember, so many Pittsburgh references today, there was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University a few years ago who was dying of cancer. And he gave what he called his last lecture, or his last lecture, and it was an epic. Yeah, it was an epic talk. And I think it was then published, and it became a whole phenomenon. This is probably 15 years ago or so, maybe even longer. So Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, the ultimate Jewish leader, he knows he's not going to go in with the people into the promised land. So what does he do? He wants to make sure that the people will be okay. He wants to make sure that even in his absence, they're going to stick to the straight and narrow. So every day he gathers them. And he tells them what they need to be aware of, what they need to remember, what they need to look out for, what they need to not repeat from the mistakes of the past. So what I didn't get when you read the book of Deuteronomy, you can't get a timeline. Because you're reading about the story of the golden calf. Why? Here. We read that in the context. What's going on? You read about Sinai, the Ten Commandments. You read about the sin of the spies. You read about what needs to happen when you go into the land. My young brain just didn't wrap itself around the context. The context, though, is very simple. Here you have a leader speaking to his people. Imagine a parent who knows that their end is near, gathering their children and saying, here's life lessons that I want you to know about. Remember that story that happened? Be careful it doesn't happen again. Here are the challenges that you might expect when you go into the land. Here are the things on a practical level. Here's how you're going to divide, the estate when I pass away. All of the things are mentioned, and it kind of moves back and forth between the past, present, and future. That is the book of Deuteronomy. In the course of these 37 days, the commandment regarding governance comes up. What does the Jewish system of governance look like? Chapter 17 of Deuteronomy tells the tale. Chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, we have two excerpts. One is verses 8 through 11. One is verses 14 through 20. It's pretty much back to back. And here, the Torah talks about establishing two branches of governance: the judiciary and the executive branch. You'll see what I mean in a second. Text number 3. Lynn, are you up to reading?
Yes.
It's a long, listen,
This one?
we're giving you a long one.
Well,
You up for it?
I'm up.
All right. Text 3, English begins on page 89. Please take it away.
If a matter of judgment eludes you, matters of dispute in your city, you shall rise and ascend to the place that the Lord your God chooses. You shall come to the Levitical priest and to the judge who will be in those days, and you shall inquire, and they will tell you the words of judgment. You shall act according to the word they tell you from that place that the Lord will choose, and you shall be careful to act according to all they instruct you. According to the law they instruct you, and according to the judgment they say to you, you shall act. You shall not divert from the word they tell you, neither right nor left. When you come to the land that the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and you say, I will set a king over myself like all the nations that are around me. You shall set a king over you, one whom the Lord your God chooses. You shall set a king over you from among your brothers. You shall not appoint a foreigner over yourself, one who is not your brother. He may not acquire many horses for himself, so that he will not bring the people back to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. For the Lord said to you, you shall not return that way anymore. He shall not take many wives for himself, and his heart will not turn away, and he shall not acquire much silver and gold for himself.
One more paragraph, please. Getting close. Yeah.
When he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write 2 copies of this Torah on a scroll. Copy from the scroll that is before the Levitical priest. The scroll should be with him, and he should read it from it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this Torah and these statutes, to perform them, so that his heart will not be haughty over his brothers, and that he will not turn from the commandment, neither right nor left, so that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his sons among Israel.
Thank you very much for reading that. A very long reading. We have so much to unpack. I mentioned before we read the reading that there are 2 branches, as it were, of governance being laid out in this reading, and it's pretty much back to back, with the exception of verses 12 and 13 in the middle. You have essentially back to back branches being delineated. What is branch number 1 that we read about in text 3? Yeah, the judicial. Exactly, the judicial. What is branch number 2? The executive. Who is branch number 1? That sounds like a game show. Sorry. Who is branch number 1? It's referring to some sort of body. What is that body called in Hebrew? The Sanhedrin. We're going to break this down. Who is the executive branch individual that we're talking about in the second half of the reading? The king. Torah talks about Sanhedrin and a melech. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, and a king. Let's break this down one at a time. Sanhedrin. What do we know about the high court? What does the Torah tell us about the high court? First of all, who is eligible to sit on the high court? So it says the Levitical priests, HaKohanim HaLevim. And then it says, Ve'el HaShofet Asher Yiyeh Bayom Hahem, and the judge who will be in those days. Levitical priest and the judge. The Talmud says, sounds like survey says, the Talmud says, Maimonides explains, that indeed the Sanhedrin, the high Jewish court, was meant to be composed of Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, priests, Levites, and the best of the best from the other tribes. In fact, it was ideal that it should contain members from all 3 classes, if it were, of the people, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, priests, Levites, and Israelites. Number 1. Number 2. How many judges were there on the Sanhedrin? It's not here, but do you know?
70?
The answer is 70, 71. There was 70, and then there was the Rosh Sanhedrin, the head of the Sanhedrin, who was the tiebreaker in case there was an issue, and thus there were 71 total. 70 plus 1, 71 judges in the Sanhedrin. Where did they sit? Where was the high court? Where did it take place? We read it in the reading. Where was it? Jerusalem. How do we know this? It says,
The place where I choose.
the place where I choose. The place, they will judge from the place that the Lord will choose. In fact, the seat of the Sanhedrin, of the Jewish Supreme Court, was inside. Yeah, it was inside the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. They had a space, they had a chamber. In fact, I got an email today from Chabad headquarters. They put together some division at HQ in Brooklyn. They're knocking out a lot of good stuff, a lot of good content. Somebody put together a virtual tour of the first, second, and what we know about the third Holy Temple to be. Kind of lahavdil, or maybe, I don't know, whatever, if you say that here. But like Google Maps, you kind of click on the next circle and it moves and you go this way, that way. Every detail of the Beit HaMikdash. I was looking at it earlier today, and it looked fascinating.
So if you wear the goggles like you're walking inside it.
I don't know if they have it. I don't know if they have it linked up to that immersive experience. This was more of like a 2D computer screen situation, but it's probably not a stretch to be able to also do that. But I'm assuming that you'll be able to see where the high court would convene. The high court, 71 judges composed of priests, Levites, and Israelites. Their word, what was their job? What does it say? To instruct. Yeah, to resolve disputes. And then it says, you shall not divert from the word they will tell you. neither right nor left. What they say about the law, how to apply the law, what the law means, you gotta stick to it. No monkey business, right or left. You gotta go straight down the path that they tell you what it means in any given situation. Okay, good. You know who was not allowed to be on the court? Who else? Who else was not allowed to be on the court? The king. You said foreigners, someone who's not. Yeah. It's a Jewish court. Someone has to be steeped in Jewish law. But the answer that I was looking for is the king, the melech, the king, which is the second half of the reading, but it's important to mention right now. A king was not eligible to be on the court. Why? Let's look at Rambam. Maimonides gives the rationale. Text number 4, Barry. Dr. Mason, please read text number 4.
Kings and courts. The king of Israel is not seated on the Sanhedrin because it is forbidden to dispute him or disobey his word.
If you put a king on the high court, you're running into a problem. The king says, this is the way it's got to be. Now what? The whole purpose of 71 justices is that you can have dialogue and debate and ultimately vote, and the ruling is in accordance with the majority. In my Bar Mitzvah Torah portion, in the Torah portion of Mishpatim, you know what it says? Acharei Rabim Lehatot, which means you follow the majority. Well, if the king is on there, there's no majority because you go by whatever the king says, you go. So the king is not invited to the Sanhedrin, incompatible. Now, you might be thinking, king doesn't judge. King David judged. King Solomon judged. The case with the mothers and the child and cutting the child in half, right? And no, you're the real mother, you're not the real mother. What does it mean? That wasn't a Sanhedrin. They were well versed in law, and you had a question, you want a ruling from the king, you go to the king. But the king can't sit on a court of 71. It's not going to happen. Because who's going to oppose the king's bid? He's got like a super majority. So it's not going to work. Now, I have to point out, or just clarify something. Not always did the court of 71 convene in its full number. You did not need 71 judges for all cases. In fact, for capital cases, you did not need 71 judges. You know what the number was for capital? 23. 23 for capital cases. 71, you only convened all 71 justices in cases of national import and interest, like to declare war or to bring the king before the court, which we'll talk about soon, and that mechanism. Yes.
So this is faint memory, and I forget which prophet, but there's the prophet weighing in a Haftarah against a monarchy, against any king. And I forget which prophet, and I forget which parsha.
So typically the prophets were always, when there was corruption in the monarchy, the prophets were always chastising the king. Famously, you have the prophet Eliyahu Hanavi chastising King Achav, Ahab, and Jezebel and Izebel. That was a very familiar story. So you are exactly correct. That would happen all the time. We'll get there in a second. That's more about prophets and kings. Let's wrap up the judicial branch, then we're going to move over to the executive/king branch. So, in short, there was a function, a necessary function of judges. You might be thinking, well, what do you need judges for? You need judges if there's a matter of dispute when it comes to the law, because the law only frames certain elements, and then there's all these other areas that are not fully framed. And the question is, okay, well, what's the law in a case that fits in between the things that we know? And you could have one opinion that says one way and one that says another way, and the judges can tell you what that ruling is. By the way, the Sanhedrin was disbanded when? Who knows when the Sanhedrin was disbanded? It's after the Second Temple's destruction. No one actually knows. It was a trick question. It's a matter of great dispute. Some people said it ended pretty much shortly after the Second Temple's destruction. Some said it went on for centuries, kind of in a quiet way and clandestine way. Either way, it ceased to function, a few hundred years essentially after the Second Temple's destruction. what's fascinating is that as long as there was a Sanhedrin, there were no disputes there ultimately was not confusion about what Jewish law is. Does that make sense? If there was a question, you took it to the court. If that court didn't know it, you took it to the higher court, to the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, and they told you, they talked about it, they discussed it, they voted, and that became halacha, that became Jewish law. Again, in a case that fits in between, if it's clear, it's clear, but in any case of confusion, the Sanhedrin ruled and basically essentially established what the law is. Thus, as long as there was a Sanhedrin, there was a single body clarifying Jewish law. Post-Sanhedrin, things are a little bit complicated. In fact, Maimonides writes that everything, all of the matters of Jewish law that are explored and discussed and debated through and until the end of the era of the publishing of the Talmud, which is around between the year 400 and 500, somewhere in the 5th century. So at the close of the Talmud, all matters of Jewish law are clear. Even though you and I might open up the Talmud and see a bunch of different opinions, by the end of the Talmud, there's a formula to figure out who's got the majority opinion, and there's clarity. Any questions that come up afterwards, there's no single body, there's no single Sanhedrin, which is why you have Ashkenazic practice, you could have Sephardic practice, you could have this opinion, you could have that opinion, my Rav says this, your Rav says that, you could have differences. There's a little bit more diversity when it comes to halachic positioning. Again, not anything that came up through the era of the Talmud, but only new questions and debates or discussions that come up post-Talmud. We're a little bit off topic, but does that make sense? Okay, so that's the role of the Sanhedrin, and the Torah lays that out. Again, before Moses says farewell to the people, before the people will enter the land, they need to know what the structure is. We need to have a court. Great. And then a few verses later, the Torah says, we got one more thing. But wait, one more thing. Let's talk about a king. A king will have the executive power, the executive function. The king will have the ability, a Jewish king will have the ability to enforce the laws, to run the nation, to govern the nation, to collect taxes, to maintain civil order, lead the nation in war, etc., much like there's a lot of crossover with our own executive branch. These two entities need to be separate, and there are some severe checks and balances. What types of checks and balances did you notice in that long text in text number 3? What were some checks and balances that you noticed, specifically on the executive branch, i.e. on the king? Correct.
The king has to be from your people.
Correct.
And that's kind of like the president of the U.S. has to be a citizen.
Correct. That's very good. So the Jewish king had to be a Jewish king.
Yeah.
So to the president, our executive has to be someone who was born here in the U.S. I believe it's not even someone who was a U.S. citizen but born outside the soil of the U.S. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I cannot be a citizen of the U.S. I was born in Israel. You guys know that? You could tell from my heavy Israeli accent.
You can be a citizen of the U.S., but not president.
I know, Mom. I know. Well, you had me in Rehovot in Israel, so what am I going to do? There you go. Folks, I graciously concede that I will not be president of the U.S., but feel free to write me in anyway if you want to. All right, good. So, that's it. That's an interesting parallel that I did not think of. That's an interesting parallel. What are some checks and balances? The king cannot have too many. Cannot have too many. Cannot have too many.
Too much silver and gold.
All right. So, horses, wives, and money. I want you to think about this for a second. In most nations, I don't know, every other nation that I'm aware of, you're not auditing the king. The king is the supreme leader. In Torah, you know what Torah says? You're going to audit the king's stable, the king's bedroom, and the king's bank account. That's what we're doing. We're auditing the king's stable, the king's bedroom, and the king's bank account. That's how it works.
But who has the power to enforce that?
Who has the power? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that soon. Let's talk about it now. Who has the power to do that? Take a look at the next text. All right, Mindy, please read text number 5 from, once again, Rambam, Maimonides.
Kings of the house of David may be judged, and testimony may be given against them.
You haul the king to court. You can haul a Jewish king to court. It's wild. The king can't serve on the court, but he can be made to show up to the court. Now you might ask, but who's actually going to drag him to court? How's that actually going to happen? I think Torah assumes, and again, you can say this is wishful thinking, the Torah assumes some measure of propriety in the sense of reverence to, to the source. And thus, that's that there's a protocol for this. What else? What are the other? What are some other checks and some interesting? I guess I don't know if the word was limitations, but some interesting nuances when it comes to the king. What's the last paragraph? I know I'm not being clear with my question. What does the last paragraph tell us about the king and the relationship between the king and the law?
He needs to write it out and read it.
And he needs and hold it. So write 2 Torahs. First of all, talk about keeping a king busy. I mean, it takes like about a year to write a Torah scroll. So all right, so we're giving the king work. The king has to keep the Torah scroll with him pretty much at all times. What's the message? What's the implicit message? It's not even so secret. You are not above the law. You are not above the law. You are not above the law. You're not above God's law. You are the king, meaning you're leading the people, you're leading them in war, you're collecting taxes, you're doing all the things that the executive branch needs to be doing. You are not above the law. You cannot have too many horses, too many women, too many wives, too much money. You're not above the law. You have to have a Torah scroll reminding you of the law. And if you get out of line, we're going to take you to court, and the Sanhedrin will take care of business over here. That is the way that the Torah envisions these different bodies. You have the Sanhedrin, you have the Jewish court, you have the king, and the king is doing, and each one is doing their thing, and there is a sense of, there are checks and balances being placed on the various roles, specifically on the role of king. Now, why all these restrictions on the king? Well, I mean, history reminds us how dangerous it is when you have a lot of power being consolidated in the hands of one person, because that can very quickly turn into tyranny. Take a look at text number 6. This is Rabbi Saadia Gaon. He wrote this about 1,100 years ago, 1,100 years ago. That's a little bit older than America is, which is 250. So this is 1,100 years ago. Rabbi Saadia Gaon writes about the dangers of power and consolidation of power leading to tyranny. Dr. Barzilai, if you don't mind, please read.
It is appropriate that I establish the matter that many overlook regarding the perils of haughtiness and power. Among them is that when people elevate themselves and become arrogant, they go beyond their proper place and trample over the near and the far. They see themselves as unique in their generation, disparage everyone else's opinion, and mock and reject their words. They will even contradict experts about their own field. They will go so far as to question the Creator's wisdom and knowledge, opposing much of it, considering it incorrect in their eyes. Their hearts will lead them to enter into all types of dangerous pursuits out of confidence that their genius will save them, and this will be their undoing.
Powerful words of caution. And you know what? Here's the big idea that I think comes out from all of this. The big idea that Rabbi Saadia Gaon is teaching us is that 3,300 years ago, before the pilgrims reached the shores of this great nation, and even longer before the founding fathers drafted the Constitution, Torah recognized and taught about the importance of separating and limiting power. There's a king, sure, but the king doesn't have ultimate power. There's a Sanhedrin. There's a court that keeps the king in check. You can't have a branch that is too powerful. And ultimately, even though it's not maybe a direct line, but ultimately this concept and these values made their way into our system and structure of government. But of course, there's a major distinction, because you might have noticed that thus far, we've only mentioned two branches of government in the context of Torah. What were the two?
Executive and judicial.
Right, the court and the king. Which branch are we missing? Do you know why the legislative branch is being omitted? Who writes the laws in Judaism? That's the difference. In the United States, who writes the laws? Congress, representatives of the people. So we write our own laws. And then we make sure they're kosher, and we make sure they're enforced, and we have all the different pieces hopefully doing their job, and it all hopefully comes together and functions on a good day. But in Torah, in Judaism, who's writing the laws? You and I, we're voting on what we want to be the law. By the way, just to be very clear here, if you and I were voting on matters of Jewish law, we would probably come up with a few amendments and a few changes and a few variances from what currently is in play. You and I, human beings, are not writing the laws. The legislative branch of Torah is completely in the hands of Almighty God. God writes the laws. That's why I said there are similarities, but it's not perfect. If you were looking for a construct of three human branches of government, Torah would not be your model, because you don't have that third human branch, that legislative branch. That is a divine branch. Take a look. Such a lovely text. Phil, if you don't mind, please read text number 7 on page 95. This is a quote from the great prophet Isaiah.
For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, and the Lord is our king.
Thank you very much. Look at that. The Lord is our judge, our lawgiver, and our king. Guess what just happened over there? All three branches. It's all God. But there's a difference. Because although God is our judge, we have human judges also. And Torah tells us that we need to appoint, establish courts. Although God is our king, we read, the Torah says you can have a human king also. But when it says the Lord is our lawgiver, guess what? That's pretty much it. There's no one else that's the lawgiver. It says that Moses transmitted the law. He wasn't writing the laws. That's our belief, right? The Lord is our lawgiver. God is the exclusive author, the great quill in the sky, as it were, that pens the laws of Torah, the laws of Judaism, the 613 mitzvot. Yeah.
What about the checks and balances? Because we don't check and balance God. I mean,
That's right. The checks and balances. Excellent question. I was going to get to this. The checks and balances in the Jewish system, in the Torah system, aren't about making sure that God doesn't have too much power, because that's not a thing. In fact, it's to ensure that God has all the power, which I'll explain. Meaning it's ensuring that no one else gets in the way, and that God's vision is being implemented in a way that is true and authentic and not being corrupted by humans that might want to corrupt it. In the American system, it's a bit different. It's to ensure that things are fair for the people, by the people, for the people, and so the checks and balances are there to make sure that no one becomes the authority. In the Jewish system, it's to ensure that God remains the authority. You see the difference? Oh, I think we got a good language there. I wasn't sure how I was going to present it, but it came out nicely, I think. Someone isolate that, right? So in the Jewish, contrast it. In the American system, the checks and balances are to make sure that no one becomes an authority. In the Jewish system, it's to make sure that only God remains the authority. Oh, I did it again. All right, good. It came out okay. Now, no, it's okay. I just want to, no, all right, keep on going. No, so here we go. Clarity, the main thing is clarity. Now, there were representatives of a God as the judge. There are human judges. God is the king of all kings, but there's a human king. God is the lawgiver. I do want to talk about members of the God squad, as it were, in the context of law giving as well. God is the only lawgiver, the great quill in the sky, as I said. But there were humans that were also in the role of helping teach this, God's law, to the people. Who were the teachers? So there's two roles. Excellent. All of the above. Levites and prophets. Let's talk about the role of both. So let's go. Helene, if you don't mind, please read text number 8. This is once again from Rambam Maimonides. And by the way, I just want to clarify before you read this. We do a lot of quoting of Rambam, and Rambam is the same as Maimonides, same guy, just one is Hebrew, one is English. Maimonides is often quoted in these classes and in general, not because he made up stuff, but because he wrote stuff in a way that was exceptionally clear. It's very quotable. Maimonides is all of this stuff comes from the Talmud and previous sources, but he compiled it and composed it in a very clear way. So here we go. Maimonides, text number 8.
Why did the tribe of Levi not receive a portion in the land of Israel and its spoils along with their brothers? Because they were set apart to serve God, to minister to him, and to teach his straight ways and righteous laws to the masses. As it is said, they shall teach your laws to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. Therefore the Levites were separated from the ways of the world. They do not wage war like the rest of Israel, nor do they inherit land, nor do they acquire possessions for themselves by their own physical strength. Rather, they are the army of God. As it is said, may the Lord bless his army. And God provides for them, as it is said, I am your portion and your inheritance.
Thank you very much. A beautiful text, an ode to the Levite, to the Levi, and it basically says, this text says, and reminds us something very important, that the role of the Levites wasn't just to minister in the temple or, sing the songs and whatever it was and assist with the offerings in the way that the Levites did, but it was primarily, a major role of the Levites was to teach your laws to Jacob and your Torah to Israel. It's a major role. Meaning, who writes the laws? God. Who makes sure that there's, law and order in the country? The king. Who answers questions about the legality, about situations that fall in the cracks? That's the judiciary. But who's the one that teaches the law to the people? Who communicates that message? The Levites. The Levites were the teachers. That's why the Levites didn't have a day job. They didn't have another job. They didn't have an agricultural job. Their heads needed to be in that space, in the space of Torah, in the space of halacha, in the space of mitzvot, and communicate that to the people. They are the army of God. It's such a beautiful text. Now, yes?
So they don't get to own any land, but they've got to live somewhere.
Yeah.
Who's the landlord?
Excellent question. There were 48 Levite cities scattered around Israel, and that was also part of it. Thank you for asking that question, because it allows the new idea to open up that I didn't mention. The Levite cities were scattered around amongst all the tribes for this very reason. They were meant to be the teachers, and there had to be teachers diversified throughout the land. So, the Levite cities were near the cities of refuge. There weren't 48 cities of refuge, but wherever the city of refuge was, the Levite cities were around over there as well. Because who needs to be communicated about what God wants than the person that may or may not have taken a life? That's somebody who needs an arm around the shoulder and to be talked, hey, let's talk about what's what. So the Levites were meant to be the teachers.
But this is still, from last week, right, the Jubilee, all the laws that say, well, you give the land back.
Right.
Who owns this land? How is it apportioned?
The land was initially set aside. There were portions of land, specific portions of land, 48 specific cities that were divided amongst the Levite families. This family here, this family there, this family there, or this group of families here, there, and the other place. And that became their inheritance. And I think the message is that they had a place to live. It's not like they were nomads. It's not like they were, rootless. But they were not meant to be of the land, even though they were in the land. They were meant to be of the law, all about the law, teaching the law, modeling the law, and thus representing it here on earth. Now, the second role that was mentioned, which is very important, yeah.
I'm still thinking about last week. Right?
Okay.
Because the text that we read last week said, but it said men, right? But we mean families. So originally were the Levites just, okay, here's a family, and everybody just ended up with an equal allotment, and then they congregated? Or?
There was a specific division of the land for the Levites.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so we didn't read that.
No. The excerpt that we had didn't have that. But there was a specific allotment, the Torah says, for the Levites, divided amongst these different spaces. Now, the second group of individuals, and this was not like a biological group necessarily, but the second group of individuals that represented God in the, as it were, in the legislative sense, were the prophets. What was the role of a prophet? What was the role of a Navi?
Mouthpiece of God.
That's it. When there was corruption, like we mentioned before, okay, here's what you need to know. So I think many of us are familiar with the 5 books of Moses, with the Chumash, what we call the Chumash. But after the 5 books of Moses closed, there are many other books. Part of what we call Tanakh, Torah, that's the 5 books, and then Nevi'im and Ksuvim, which means the books of the prophets and the books of scripture, which would be like the Megillot, like Ruth and Esther, and then there's Psalms and Ecclesiastes, all of the other books. But the books of the prophets are Samuel 1, Samuel 2, the adventure continues, the book of Joshua, Judges, Samuel 1, Samuel 2, book of Kings, etc., 1 and 2. All right, so all of these books, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all these books of prophets. I think that's, for many of us, there's a bit of a gap there. I know it's studying in Chabad Yeshivot. In Chabad Yeshiva, we didn't really study Nevi'im. We didn't study the books of the prophets. And I always think it's because Chabad is a non-prophet. I don't know. I throw stuff against the wall. If it sticks, it sticks. I'm trying like the rest of us. All right. So, there's a little bit. But one thing, if you do read these texts, you notice that it wasn't so long after the kingdom of Israel was established, or the Jewish kingdom was established, that they broke into 2 pieces, they splintered, they fractured. The son of King Solomon, so there were 3 kings in the beginning, and then there were more after that, but Saul, David, Solomon. His son, Rehoboam, in his lifetime, the kingdom splits. 2 high taxes, they revolt. Now there's a kingdom to the north, kingdom to the south. You have the kingdom of Israel in the north, the kingdom of Judah in the south, and the whole thing blows, whatever. It starts fracturing. Very often, at the core of the issue was idolatry. Can you imagine a religion, a way of life, Judaism that is predicated on monotheism, had very often kings who were obsessed with idolatry, who would erect temples and altars for the idols, who would encourage their people, Jews, to worship idols. It's bananas. It's crazy. The first temple was destroyed in part due to idolatry. And the prophets railed against it. God says to the prophets, speak to the people, speak to the king, speak truth to power about not serving idols, not worshiping idols, getting back on track with the Jewish way of life. All to say that the role of the prophets was also to communicate God's word to the people. Again, God writes the laws, the Levites teach the laws, the prophets help communicate the laws, but it's all coming from God Almighty. Text number 9. Neely, if you don't mind, please read text 9 on page 96.
I will set up a prophet for them from among their brothers like you, Moses. I will put my words into his mouth, and he will speak to them all that I command him. Whoever does not heed my words that he speaks in my name, I will hold them accountable.
So you got to listen to a prophet. By the way, how do you know when a prophet's legit?
Yeah.
How do you know?
When what he says comes true?
No, if you look at your bank statements.
Oh.
Joking. Again, that joke. I went back to the same well twice. Sorry. How do you know when a prophet is legit? What's the answer? What did you say? It's when
When what he speaks forth comes true.
So his predictions come true. However, the Torah actually says that's not a great judge of it. Because it could be In Deuteronomy it says, could be that you have a person who tells you what's going to happen, and it happens. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy's a prophet. And then he'll tell you that you don't have to do this mitzvah. You don't have to do that mitzvah. God told me to tell you that, whatever. That used to be, not anymore. God changed his mind. You don't have to do it. You don't have to keep it. The Torah says, that's how you know not a legitimate prophet. It's not legit. Don't listen to the guy. And then the Torah says, and if you're going to ask, if the guy's not legit, so why does he have the powers of a prophet? Because God is testing you to know whether you're going to follow God or follow the shiny, sparkly thing that looks cool. God will set, this is what Moshe tells the people before they enter the land. It's going to happen that prophets will arise, or supposed prophets will arise, that have power to do magic tricks. And then they're going to tell you to go astray. And that's going to be a test. If this were a real test, the public broadcasting system, whatever that was, remember the beep? That. All right, yes, makes sense? Yeah. So a legitimate prophet is not only someone who makes predictions that comes true, but someone who remains authentic to Torah's message. Coupled together, that's how you know. Exactly. It's got to line up. If it doesn't line up, then you can't, then it's not a legitimate prophet. Why is it happening? Because otherwise, who would listen to a prophet that's getting anything wrong? It's getting everything wrong. I tell you, tomorrow, I remember. There was a guy, oh my gosh, my youth is coming back tonight. I don't know what it is. It's Pittsburgh, Murray Avenue night. Murray Avenue, Pittsburgh, PA. There was a guy by, has anyone here spent time in Pittsburgh? In this room? All right, well, my mom, a little bit?
2 days.
2 days, all right. All right, but those were 2 amazing days, I'm sure. On Murray Avenue in the hood in Squirrel Hill, I don't know if it's the hood, in Squirrel Hill, it's the big Jewish area, and there's a lot of hills and a lot of squirrels, I guess, hence the name Squirrel Hill. So there was a synagogue, Sha'arei Torah, where the yeshiva that I went to was, before they had their own building, they kind of used space in that building for a little bit. There was a guy standing on the street. Mom, I don't know if you remember him. With a sign, always about like the end is coming. Yeah, do you guys have that in your city? Like some dude with a placard, a little sign?
Every subway car in Manhattan.
Okay, well there you go. Every subway car in Manhattan. Yeah, I've been So something about like the end of days and whatever, and which reminds me of another story where this guy's driving his Corvette super fast down the windy road, and he sees 2 guys with a sign. He slows down, looks at it, says, the end is near. He rolls down his window. You wackos, go home, get out of here. He speeds off, and then they hear this horrific crash. And one says to the other, maybe the sign should have said, bridge out. No, instead of the end is near, a little bit clearer as to what the end means. Let's get back to the point. A real prophet is not, so this guy. Oh, no. This guy in Pittsburgh, he was always like 30 days. Like 30 days. We got 30 days. And like 30 days passed. And like, now what? He's got another 14 days. He's got like an adjustment. Yeah, that guy, who's going to listen to the guy that gets everything wrong? It's the guy that gets things right.
It's like Y2K.
Right. Oh, remember Y2K? Everything was going to blow up. I remember, I'm like, first of all, I think I was super analog then. Like, what did I even have that was digital? But I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like, people were like standing by ATMs. Is it going to shoot out all the money? Like, what's going to happen? Y2K, everything's, all right. Little did we know that AI was going to take over the world, but that's another story. Good. Makes sense so far? Yeah, Mindy.
Did the job of the prophets, you said that they would never say to go astray from Torah, then you know it's a false.
Well, then you know it's, yeah.
But was their job also to predict the future?
That wasn't their job. No, the job of a prophet is not to predict the future. That's the job of economists and forecasters, weather forecasters, which, somebody once told me that if you predict that tomorrow will be the same weather as today, you will be right on average more than actual weather forecasts. Even though certainly it changes, but by and large, it's the same tomorrow as it was today. That's typically the way it works. That's neither here nor there. The job of a prophet is not to predict the future. That's not a thing. What's the value in that? It's like it's a cool magic trick. It's a cool parlor trick. It's like, oh, hey, yeah, like Rocky and Bullwinkle. Watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. Again.
See the future, like that's, right? Like,
Well, I'm wondering.
That's not necessarily the role of a prophet. No. The role of a prophet directly is not about seeing the future. The role of the prophet is to communicate what God is conveying. Sometimes what God is conveying is you have to right the ship or else this is going to go off the cliff, to mix metaphors with ships and cliffs, right? You got to right the ship or else it's going to crash. It's going to hit a thing. That would be the context of kind of like a future tense in the conversation. But it's really a prophet is someone, as Maimonides describes, so attuned to God, has so refined themselves, and so attuned to God that they communicate seamlessly God's word to the people. It's not about adding a mitzvah. That's, if someone says, oh, I got a new mitzvah, or we can take one away, that's, you throw a flag on the play. Oh, hold on, red card. Right? Yeah.
So Rabbi Sachs talks a lot about the difference between the priestly voice and the prophetic voice.
Nice.
The priestly voice is it's like the Korban Tamid. Every day the same thing. Like we see the prayers the same way as they represent the offerings. But the priest's job was the consistency, and whereas the prophet was the voice of today. And so there was a different tone of voice of the different prophets, and they spoke to the people in a way that was relevant to what was going on in their generation.
I love that. I love that framing.
And I think of that as being like the rabbinic voice today.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's a different generation, and the way they speak and interpret is a little bit different over the years and centuries.
Beautiful.
But grounded in the root of the consistency of Torah law. Beautiful.
So if I were to repeat that in my own words, just in case it didn't, folks at home didn't hear that, basically the Levitical voice, is that how he calls it? What does he call it?
He calls it the Kohanic or priestly voice.
The priestly voice. So the priestly voice would be the voice of consistency. This is what Torah says. This is right. That's like the Korban Tamid, the consistent. Whereas the prophetic voice is the voice of now. Folks, this is what we need to know. This is what we need to be careful of. This is what we need to work on. This is the mission of the day or the mission, but always consistent again with the supreme lawgiver God. So kind of rounding this out, and then we're going to advance the conversation. I think it's important to remember that in Torah you have essentially the same three branches, can we say? But it's just structured differently. You have the branch of the judiciary, you have the judicial branch, that's the supreme, the courts, the Bet Din, the Sanhedrin, whatever it is. You have the branch of the executive, which would be the king, or even whoever, even if it wasn't a king, but someone in that position of kind of authority on that level, kind of to run the nation, to run the country. And then you have the role of the legislative branch, the legislature, which is God. And you have those people that God chooses to represent that voice and convey it. Because how does God's law get conveyed to human beings on earth? Sometimes you need a human channel to make that happen. But again, like I said before, although each system, and the U.S. system has the same, similar three branches, but it's very different in the sense that the U.S. system is trying to ensure that there's not a top-down hierarchy or top-down concentration of that authority, whereas in Judaism you absolutely do want that top-down concentration of authority. Look, the founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, they were very cognizant of what they were running away from, and what they were running away from were systems that were very much authoritative, very much running away from a church that they didn't believe in, or a king that they didn't believe in or have faith in. They were very much running away from that authoritative space. Whereas in Torah, it's like, we call them the 10 Commandments, not the 10 suggestions, right? It's not like multiple choice, like, 6 out of 10 ain't bad. It's not, it's commandments. I always say that it doesn't come from me. I think Rabbi Sachs writes extensively about this. America, in the American documents, the U.S. documents, there's a lot of the terminology is framed in terms of rights. Whereas in Judaism, in Torah, you don't really find the concept of rights. It doesn't say in the Ten Commandments parents have a right to be honored by their children. It's not how it's framed. It's you need to honor your parents. It's not like you have a right to life. It's no. You cannot take a life. I have the right to property. No. You can't steal. It's not about rights, it's about responsibilities and obligations. It's a bit of a different system. It's a bit of an authoritative system, kind of a top-down system. And the checks and balances are there to ensure, like I said before, that that doesn't get in the way of that. So because of this, we have an asymmetrical, or we have a feature in the U.S. system that certainly would not appear in the Torah system. And that is the separation of church and state. This is something that's a feature in the U.S. system, right? Precisely because we want to make sure that there's no kind of top-down authoritative system, overreach, exactly. They were coming from what they felt was religious persecution, etc., and other forms of persecution. They wanted to make sure that there was no overriding element. Therefore, this leads directly to text number 10. First Amendment of the Constitution, penned in 1791, states as follows. Marty, please read, if you will, page 98.
Freedom of religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Thank you very much. This is called the Establishment Clause. Well, there's two clauses, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. What are these two clauses saying? So number one, there is no national or state religion. Number two, nor will the state get in the way of you practicing or worshiping the God of your choosing. Those are the two elements of the First Amendment, and they're very important. Famously, it was a few years later that Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, which was a religious minority in Connecticut, and they were concerned about their freedoms being protected. And he wrote that the First Amendment was meant to build a wall of separation between church and state, and that becomes the origin of that line, separation of church and state. It's not from the Constitution itself. It's from a letter that Jefferson wrote about the intent of the First Amendment. But of course, this itself has been the subject of much discourse and debate and interpretation. What does it mean to have a wall of separation between church and state? The way it's evolved in this country is essentially to provide for literally that wall of separation between any religious activities and the government and state, to the point that there's no, for example, there's no government funding, state funding for religious activities or schools, that sort of thing. Private religious schools are not supported by the government. That's kind of been the way, that's kind of been the norm. And the notion, I think the rationale behind that is that we don't want this slippery slope of saying, okay, well, we're supporting religious activities, but then maybe we're going to support one more than the other, and before you know it, now we have a national religion. So to avoid all of that, let's just cut out the whole entire notion of religious activity and religious education, religious practice and worship. You want to do it, you're on your own, but don't mix the government. The government's not going to get involved at all. Again, I think back to my childhood. Do you know where I grew up again? Anyway, so thinking about back in the 80s, there was a Supreme Court case, Allegheny County. It's the county that Pittsburgh is in, about putting up the menorah on City Hall. Supreme Court ruled there, I think it was 1988, 1989. Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional. It was constitutional to have a menorah erected in City Hall. But the rationale of the majority of the justices was because the menorah is not exclusively a religious symbol, but is a holiday symbol. But we took it and ran with that because although no rabbi in their good standing would say that a menorah is not a religious symbol, but for the purposes of the ruling, again, that was, all right, we'll take it. If there's a tree, if there's a whatever it is, we'll take a menorah there as well. And certainly Chabad was happy in that outcome. Anyway.
So the rationale was that it was a symbol of freedom.
Yeah, there were different rationales penned by different justices, even in the minority opinion that said it was okay. There were some nuances between them, but that's for another class, for another time. I've done classes on that before. The point that I'm trying to bring out is that The counter argument, and we're going to read a text from the Rebbe soon, text 11, that will probably be our final text. Yeah, text 11. The counter argument is to say that the founding fathers never intended for religion to be kind of, othered. That, religion, we don't get involved with religion. On the contrary, they were religious people. And they wanted the free exercise of religion. So this hard and fast wall of separation between church and state is maybe a bit of not true to the intention. The Rebbe makes this argument in text number 11. I am going to read this in the interest of time. We have just a few minutes. I'm going to read this quickly. Page 98, text number 11. Here we go. This is from 1983. One other thing that you need to know about this text is the Rebbe was very much an advocate for education. In fact, National Education and Sharing Day USA is set each year on the Rebbe's Hebrew birthday. So Education and Sharing Day USA every year is established on the Rebbe's Hebrew birthday to this very day. The Rebbe passed away in 1994, but it's always changed as the English date based on the Hebrew calendar, and it's a very interesting thing. The Rebbe was passionate about education, spoke extensively, hours on end, and advocated hours on end for education, excellence in education, reform in education, not just Jewish education, not just yeshiva education. This is public school education. Text number 11. One of the but the Rebbe here, as you'll see, is arguing for a presence of God, of some higher authority, of some right and wrong, objective right and wrong in that system as well. One of the fundamental principles that a child must learn in order to grow up to be a moral human being is that God exists, that the world has a master who created it and supervises its functioning. A child must know that the world has a master who has set up principles of righteousness, justice, and kindness according to which our lives should be lived. In this manner, it will be made clear to him that the world is God's dwelling. Only through this behavior will it be possible to establish stable social norms. There are those, as mentioned above, who argue that taking such an approach in public schools violates the principles of the separation of church and state. Their mistake comes from the fact that they view the subject superficially and do not try to penetrate to its core. One must remember, the Rebbe argues, that the United States was founded by religious men who came here seeking freedom from the lack of religious tolerance in other lands. Therefore, they placed as a fundamental element of the Constitution each person's right to follow his own religion, and thus restricted the power of the government to involve itself in its citizens' religious lives. However, their intent was not to prevent those parents who want their children to gain an appreciation of God from doing so. It's ridiculous to think that the founders of this country, who sought to ensure religious freedom, would place a clause in the Constitution that forbade the mention of God in the nation's schools. If one does not content himself with merely a superficial understanding of the Constitution, but attempts to comprehend its inner intent, it becomes obvious that the promise of religious freedom without any limitation is one of its fundamental principles. Here the Rebbe is arguing that if you read into the intent, and you know who they were and why they were and what they were doing in establishing this country and writing the Constitution, etc., it will be clear that it was never about banning God, evicting God from the classroom, from the schools, from the wherever it is, but rather embracing God, but doing so in a way that is not shoving things down people's throats. Now, the counter argument is, I understand the counter argument, that once you are involved in any way, the whole thing might blow up, and the next thing you know, there's a national religion, and I understand that point, but the Rebbe was saying that there might be a way to make this happen. It's something that we spoke about in the last course that we did, right before this one, which was called For All Humankind. So I don't want to read the text again. This is text 12. I said, we're not going to read that text, but to summarize it, the Rebbe said, the Rebbe was very clear about his position on what the intent of the founders of this country meant when they wrote that amendment to the Constitution, the Establishment Clause and the First Amendment. However, given the current situation, the Rebbe said we can have there's an approach that might make everybody happy, which is a moment of silence. The Rebbe was very much an advocate for a moment of silence, which again, we spoke about at length in our last course, so I'm not going to do it again. But essentially, this would be a time at the beginning of the school day where the teachers would tell the students We're now taking a moment of silence. You can think about whatever you want. So there's no promotion of God. There's no mention of God. There's no mention of any specific God, let alone even, there's no mention of a general God, let alone even a specific God or modality of worship. But it provides a space for a child, if instructed or guided by his or her parents, to think about something greater than self, something greater than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, something that might speak to the morals, the values, the obligations, the responsibilities of being a decent and moral human being. And that's a nice way to get the day started. So this is a way that could be non-offensive, non-dogmatic, what's the word I'm looking for? Sectarian or denominational. That's the word I'm looking for, non-denominational in a way, but allows that space for that to exist so that you're completely cutting out any and all space. So that was the Rebbe's approach. Anecdotally, I've heard that there are public school systems that have adopted the moment of silence, and it has helped anecdotally. I've heard, have I read the studies? Have I done the research myself? No, but I've read anecdotally from Chabad rabbis that are very much trying to carry this message that the Rebbe said, and that there are case studies that show that this is actually helping in public schools. Again, this is not about religious Jewish day schools. They're davening in the morning. They got that covered. This was the Rebbe speaking about American U.S. public schools, about having that space, having that time for a child, 60 seconds, 120 seconds, whatever that time is, to be able to think, if they choose, about something higher and greater. Which takes us to the end of today's lesson. What we've seen today is that there is a delicate balance that the Founding Fathers sought to strike between the various powers of our governance. I mean, you need different roles to function in a precise way to make sure that things are moving forward, and yet things are not tilting over one side or the other. It's a very fine balance between giving power and having that power not slip into tyranny. The way to do that, the Founding Fathers believed, was to create division of powers and checks and balances. We said before they got this from a French philosopher, Montesquieu, but ultimately the first text that we know of that talks about a limit on powers in governance is the Torah. And that's very inspiring. It's been a theme throughout this course, it's been the purpose of this course, to show how some of the greatest American values have their place in Torah. And it's not about bragging rights. It's not about patting ourselves on the back and saying, oh, we had it first. Although, no. But it's not about that. What it's about is appreciating the wisdom of Torah. Appreciating the values that make this country great. Appreciating the values that make Judaism great. And recommitting ourselves to being good ambassadors of what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a Yid. Because at the end of the day, people will look at us and judge us by, by the content of our character. And if, we always, it's the summer and my kids are in camp, and I remember as counselors, we would always tell the kids, look, you're going to Six Flags, you got to keep on your head. You got strings flying when you run. If you cut the line, you know what they're going to say? Look at the Jewish kids. If you eat your lunch and you throw the wrappers on the, what they're going to say? The Jewish kids are messy. That's just the way it is. We can be upset about it. It's not fair. It's targeted. Other, whatever. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we carry responsibility. And you know what happens in the world when there's a scandal, a financial scandal or otherwise? You know what people say? Look, it was the Jews again. We carry a responsibility. We are God's witnesses. Atem edai nu'um Hashem. God says, you are my witnesses. We testify by our actions. Not by our words, by our actions. And so my wish for all of us is that we should be inspired to carry the values of Torah, to carry the values of America, and be a good citizen and be a good Jew. May God bless America. May God bless Israel. May God bless the Jewish people. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the class. You guys have been amazing. I love all the conversation, all the discussion, all the questions, all the feedback. Hope you enjoyed it. I want to just make a few quick announcements about scheduling and some things that are coming up, some courses that are upcoming. So this course is part of the JLI, Jewish Learning Institute series of classes, curriculum prepared out of New York for Chabads and other centers worldwide. This concludes. We've done we did 5 courses this year. We did 4 plus a bonus one that I adapted. We've done 5 this year. We are the next JLI course. We have plenty of learning opportunities otherwise, but the next course like this will be launched after the holidays. So that's in a few months. But don't worry, you still have to learn Torah in between then and now. All right, don't worry. You're not off the hook for the mitzvah of Limud Torah, for learning Torah. But our next course is going to be after the high holidays. I know this course extremely well. You know why? No, but my good friend wrote it, Rabbi Mordechai Dinnerman, and I am one of the course editors. So I just spent with him 2 nights ago, an hour and a half on the phone, talking about lesson 5 out of 6. So I've edited the first 5 lessons with a few other guys, and the course is fantastic. Now you might be wondering, well, what's the title of the course? Okay, JLI hired a marketing team. I think they spent a lot of money on the marketing team, and they came up with a title. The title's fine. I have my own title for it. I would like to call it, if it were up to me, and I have told them this, I would call it Kabbalah and Me. That's what I would call it. The course is fascinating Kabbalistic ideas about the relationship between Kabbalah and us. And it's maybe that it's hard to describe on one foot, but it will talk about subjects like the meaning of your name, the effect of the clothes that you wear on the supernal sephirot, on the supernal energies. It's a course that is fascinating, that's personal, inspiring, and empowering all at the same time. It's a fabulous course. Mark your calendars. I don't remember the exact date. It's somewhere in October. Does that make sense? The holidays end in October. So a few weeks, about 2.5 weeks after the holidays end, on a Wednesday, boom, this course will launch in October. Maybe October 29. I don't know. Somewhere toward the end of October, this course launches. Now, next year, the 3 major flagship JLI courses, the fall course is the Kabbalah course that I'm mentioning. The winter course is a course on Israel. And the 3rd course in spring is a course about food. Are you hungry yet? All right, because it's a course all about food. So those are the 3 courses. However, before then, we have many more opportunities. We have classes pretty much every day of the week. We have a Sunday class. There's a Monday class that happens. We have, Sunday class, 2 Monday classes. There's a Tuesday class. Wednesdays we're off now for a little bit. There's Thursday opportunities. And of course, Shabbat as well with Davening 101. Check your local listings. Check your Torah guide. Sorry, not TV guide. Your Torah guide. You can check our website, the Torah Center ATL.org, for all the up-to-date information. I do want to end with this. 2 points. Number 1, we are doing our first ever Jewish calendar, community calendar for Atlanta. 2,000 homes in and around Atlanta. If you want to put in an ad or a dedication or a birthday or a yard site or an anniversary, there's an opportunity to do so, to be part of the calendar and to get on the calendar and to, of course, help support the Torah Center. All of this, you can find information for it on the website. Again, the Torah Center ATL.org. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is we are we are vigorously working on our first ever gala dinner. The date of the dinner is August 31st, I believe. The date of the dinner, 31st confirmed? All right. August 31st, it's a Monday night. We are going big, we are going bold, featured. So it's going to be an inspiring evening, an elegant evening, a sit-down dinner, all the 9 yards, a beautiful, beautiful evening in a beautiful location. We will also be having, as the featured, I don't know if the right word is entertainment, because you'll hear why I don't like that word, but the featured attraction, thanks Mom, is a hero from the Bondi shooting in Australia. A survivor and a hero who saved the life of a police officer. He's a young man. He's about 22 years old. And he will be here in Atlanta for one night only. He will be telling his story, and he's a musician. He will be playing music and singing. And it's going to be an amazing and inspiring evening, multimedia, sound, voice, and visuals. It's not to be missed. Save the date. More information will be coming out very, very soon. Save the date, Monday, August 31st. Again, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you soon. Laila Tov. Thank you all. Questions, comments?